Good evening and happy spring. Glad to see you all made it out on this blustery spring evening, and hopefully it will change very soon. My name is Chris Malmgren. I'm the director at the Lake Placid Historical Society. Actually, it's the Lake Placid North Elba Historical Society, isn't it? I better get that right. Tonight, we are hosting our third program in our winter lecture series, and we've gone a little bit in a different direction this evening. Instead of one single presenter, we have a panel discussion, and tonight's topic is Get Down and Dirty, Farming in the Adirondacks, and we're very pleased to have 4 local farms participating. They are Harmony Hills Farmstead in Malone, Little Big Farm from Sugarbush, the North Country School and Camp Treetops Farm and Garden from Lake Placid, and Wild Work Farm in Keene Valley. So why don't we give them a hand? And we're very pleased to have with us tonight Aaron Thomas, and he's the Farm and Stewardship Specialist with the Adirondack Land Trust, and he is our host and moderator for the panel discussion tonight. Just a couple of things before we get started. We will be welcoming audience questions at the end of the panel discussion, and Aaron will let you know when that time comes. We do have to ask, though, if you have a question tonight, we need you to raise your hand or stand, and somebody will come to you with a mic. We need for the panelists to hear the questions and each other, and because this is being recorded, if you don't have a mic, then it doesn't get into the YouTube video, because you're all going to be famous. So we appreciate your cooperation on that. And finally, for those of you participating in the raffle tonight, we will be announcing the winner after the program, and appreciate if you'd stay seated and stick around until we confirm whether or not you're the winner, and then you can take your basket with you. So we appreciate that. So thank you again for coming, and I'm going to turn the program over to Aaron Thomas.
Great, thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'll start off by sharing a little bit about myself. I have a lifetime experience in farming and food systems. I grew up on a small farm in central New York, raising sheep and goats for their wool. My mother would dye, spin, and knit the wool into hats, sweaters, and scarves, and we would pack it up as a whole family and drive all over the East Coast to different artisan fairs and woolen festivals. I then went to SUNY Plattsburgh and Minor Institute for a degree in environmental science with a focus in climate change and agriculture. During that time, I worked various food system jobs, including my personal favorite, a pie maker at Ralph's Orchard in Peru. I then started my professional career in agriculture conservation, and I'm currently the Farmland and Stewardship Specialist with the Adirondack Land Trust, where we conserve farms, forests, and wild places. I'd like to share this brief video with you to further introduce the Adirondack Land Trust.
A promise lasts forever.
You never can break a promise.
It's a commitment made with unwavering resolve.
And it only works with trust.
The Adirondack Land Trust works to uphold the promise to keep the Adirondacks a place for people and nature forever.
Forever. Forever.
By protecting forest, farmlands, and waters,
and the wild places that contribute to our communities.
Bolster resilience to climate change.
and provide habitat for wildlife.
And we promise
we're ready to do more.
Thanks to the Adirondack Land Trust, this farmland will stay farmland.
This land, these trees, will always be a forest.
This river will remain clean and healthy.
We'll be able to share our culture with more people for generations to come.
Since 1984, we've made extraordinary progress, working alongside partners across the Adirondacks to achieve lasting results.
because we believe if we take care of nature,
Nature will take care of us.
that's why this work is essential.
and we are building on over 40 years of success to focus on the future.
Because the Adirondack Land Trust is committed to conserving what makes the Adirondacks the Adirondacks.
Forever and ever and ever.
As promised.
Great. So before introducing our panelists, I'd just like to reiterate what Chris said to go over the flow for the evening. First, I'll ask a question to each of the panelists, and they'll answer that same question. And we just kindly ask that you keep your questions until the end during the Q&A period. So with that, it's my privilege to introduce our panelists. We have Jeffrey and Marissa Dupree from Little Big Farm in Sugar Bush, Erica Burns from the North Country School and Camp Treetops Farm and Garden, Michelle Aslin from Harmony Hills in Malone, and Lisa Goldstein from Wildworks Farm in Keene Valley. So first question here is, please introduce yourself and the name of your farm and tell us your favorite farm fresh food. Anybody dying to start? Great.
My name is Jeffrey Dupree. I own Little Big Farm in Sugar Bush, New York with my wife Marissa. And, I thought about this question. There's really not a set answer. It's really whatever is fresh and whatever is in season. I was making maple syrup today, and I would say today my answer is maple syrup. In July, it will definitely be a fresh tomato.
Or maple snow,
Maple snow.
Today, right?
I'm Marissa Hernandez Dupre, Little Big Farm with Jeff. And off the top of my head, my favorite farm fresh food is probably a fresh tomato right off the vine.
My name is Erica Burns. I am the barn manager for North Country School and Camp Treetops. And my favorite farm fresh food is definitely bacon and eggs.
Us too. Sorry. Michelle Aslin, Harmony Hills Farmstead. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is awesome to see all the smiling faces. So thank you on this bitter cold night. Anyway, I would think that it depends on the season as well, but I would have to say carrots are my favorite just because they're so diversified. You can eat them fresh, soup, stews, doesn't really matter. They're always a yummy treat.
My name is Lisa Goldstein, and I am with Wildworks Farm in Keene Valley, and my favorite farm fresh food is winter greens. So greens that we're harvesting right now out of our greenhouses.
Yeah, Frankie too.
Yeah.
We missed one. What was her favorite?
Sounds like she's pretty into the greenhouse also.
All right. So I was wondering if you could please tell us a distinguishing feature of your farm, whether it's a geographic feature or if it's some sort of ethos with your farm. Anybody?
I start. Well, our farm is really a homestead farm. We farm with the intention really of feeding ourselves and our family and our loved ones with the best food that we have, that we can come up with. And I think that distinguishes us in the sense that we're not looking to sell things. We tried some farmers markets when we moved here 5 years ago. And pretty quickly just discovered that wasn't really what we wanted to do, that our mission was first and foremost just to feed our family well and to be as, I guess, dynamic and sustainable as we could be in pursuing that endeavor. And I guess in terms of what distinguishes us as a farm, I would cite that. Our labor comes from either my wife and myself or my two kids. And we squeeze our farm life in and around everything else that we have to do to survive and sustain ourselves. We identify as farmers, but the reality of it is we do a whole bunch of other stuff to be able to come home and do what we really enjoy doing, which is farming. And we take a lot of pride in being able to feed ourselves more and more all the time. And I think that for us, there's empowerment in that, there's excitement in that, and a lot of pride as well.
Great.
I would say the biggest kind of distinguishing feature of the farm at North Country School and Camp Treetops is that children are a part of every little bit of it. We have children in grades 4 through 9 and campers ages 8 to 14, and they take part in all aspects of the farm. And that's really a magical and wonderful thing. These children are learning about where their food comes from, and they're learning about the hard work that goes into that, and they get to experience the joy of lambing, and that's really wonderful. And sometimes they experience heartbreak, and that's a part of farming, and that's a part of understanding about the food that you're eating. So I think that that's really something that sets that farm in that space apart.
I think the one distinguishing factor with Harmony Hills Farmstead is just clearly being as sustainable as possible. It is just my husband and I, and he works full-time off the farm. I'm on the farm full-time, so definitely boots on, well, in the mud right now, in the snow. But it gives you a different perspective on where your food comes from and why it's so important, and that connection is very intimate for us. And so I think consistency with definitely integrity is what we always strive for. And we do the farmers markets, and it's really important for me. I'm the one that does the farmers markets, that I'm able to look a customer in the eye and let them know exactly where their product has come from. So I can tell you when that pig was born. So the other distinguishing factor is everything born on our farm stays on our farm. So we have the cows and the calves and the bulls and the sows and the boar, and so we have the whole breeding program, the raising program, and then the finishing program, all on our small farm.
I think there's two really distinguishing features about our farm. One is our location. We're kind of right in the middle of a high peak, so it's a very dramatic location. And then the other thing that's interesting about our farm is that it's a piece of collectively owned land that's been in my family for over 100 years. So it's owned by a group of family members that all really care about the place and all pay to kind of keep the land in the family. And there's over 50 shareholders in the property, which is just a really unique way to kind of maintain family land when you know it's so hard to maintain some of these large Adirondack properties. So I think that's a really interesting thing about our farm.
Great, thank you. So leading into that, how did you get your start in farming, and what sparked your passion?
I can go first. I actually started on the farm where I am now. I was really interested in farming. My family used to come up to Rivermead for vacations as a kid. And I was always curious about what my cousin Rob was doing, and I would pick zucchini, and I would like trade for maple candy. And then when I was 14, he finally let me work for him. So I spent part of the summer that I was 14 working for him, and then never looked back, just kept going. So yeah, traveled around and farmed in different places, and then I'm now farming back on the same land where I started.
Which is beautiful. Thanks.
I was born and raised on a farm in Western New York. My parents were farmers. We had a small hobby farm. My parents went to work during the day. We raised all of our own beef and all of our own pork. And I didn't really know anything else for a very long time. I grew up in a place and in a period in time when farming hadn't become, in some ways, the fad that it is now. There was a lot of necessity behind the way that I was raised, and I struggled a lot through high school with the fact that farming wasn't cool. I was not received well by a lot of the people in my high school because it wasn't what was in at the time, and that was really hard as a young person to experience. And so I went off to college, and I was very passionate about horses, and I knew that that's part of what I wanted to be and have in my life. And so I studied throughout college, and I worked on different farms because that's what I knew to pay my bills. And I transitioned through different types of farms. I worked on dairy farms, and I worked on large-scale thoroughbred farms. And then I met my husband, and I moved to Lake Placid, and there aren't that many farms here. And that was sort of a surprise to me, to be in a space where there wasn't the level of farming that I had been used to. So I worked at a bank for a while, and I worked in some restaurants, and it was not good for my soul. I really realized at that point that farming wasn't something that I could just walk away from. It was a part of who I was. And was fortunate enough to come across the job at North Country School and get to continue working in that capacity.
Well, I grew up in Northern California, and my first farming experience was on marijuana farms for a really long time. And I didn't start growing vegetables until I met Jeff about 10, 11 years ago. That's really my start.
That's really interesting to hear everybody's story. I think my first job was undoubtedly picking Colorado potato beetles for a friend of my parents when I was just a little kid, with a coffee can of gasoline and dropping them in there. Probably getting paid in quarters that I lost back in a card game to the same guy later that afternoon. It's interesting to hear your story about growing up in farming, because that experience aside, I was kind of a suburban brat growing up, and didn't ever really feel comfortable in my skin until I left home after high school and went to college really briefly, got kicked out very quickly, and moved out west to California, where I too, as a 20-year-old, was introduced to farming, growing marijuana, but it was also the first time in my life where I really began to feel in touch with something that wasn't someone else's expectation for me. It was something that just felt right. And in Northern California is a great place for back to the landers and homesteaders, and the organic food movement has taken root there, has been rooted there for a long time. So I really quickly met some people of like mind, worked on all manner of farms, growing all manner of things, all sorts of food, vegetables primarily, and just loved it. Loved the lifestyle, the way that it connects you to something outside of yourself, keeps you forever humble and guessing, and requires that you're curious about problem solving, because problems are always there and they're not always easily solved. And we moved back here about 5 years ago, and primarily with the intention of being able to afford a piece of land, because we couldn't do that in California, and have just felt really comfortable, and have been really pleased to find a community of farmers with a pretty similar mindset, just in terms of being stewards to land and caretakers to land, and really trying to farm with integrity and purpose. But I think that's about what I got there. That's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you for sharing. I always find it inspiring to hear everyone's different stories, but we all ended up in the same place.
Yeah.
So we all know that the food system and local food system has its challenges, and farming itself. If you had one wish to change something about any aspect of farming, what would it be?
I'd love to start this one. It would be the outside perception and the way that people view it. I think hands down this is the hardest and the most rewarding work I have ever done. And I think that until you have worked through all of the phases and all of the stages and seen an entire life cycle, it's just something that's so hard to put into words what is happening. And it's one of the things that's amazing about North Country School. Children get to see life cycles. They see birth and they see death. And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to talk about with other people. They have an opinion preformed or an idea of what they think is happening on a farm, but they haven't been there. They haven't been dirty. They haven't been in the barn in the middle of the night when something is being born or when something is dying, and you can't put into words what is happening in that moment. I wish that people could see all of it. They could see all of the pieces of the work that's happening, and then I think the world would be a better place because we would have an appreciation of what's happening to feed everybody. I think sometimes we formulate these opinions, whether it's about big ag being bad or little ag being only good, and not all big ag is bad and not all little ag is good, but you don't know that until you go and you see it and you live it and you work with those farmers and you talk with them about what they're passionate about, and you see the way that they take care of their creatures or the love that they put into the fields and the care that they put back into the soil. I think until you've been in there and you've tried to kind of see the world through their lens, I think it's really easy to form an opinion, and I wish that people could see all the wonderful and amazing and really hard things that we see on a farm.
I think it's a beautiful answer, and I agree. I think I struggled with this question a little bit initially in reviewing it prior to this evening, because my first thought was I've come to so spiritually appreciate what farming is for all its complexities that there's no part of it that I would remove, say, to make it easier. You can't simplify it in that manner. But hearing you speak, I think that perhaps the answer that I would offer would be just to take a step closer, I think there's probably, anything in life, if you're curious enough about it, I think there's just some threshold that you have to cross in which you're just willing to try and then learn by doing. And for me, farming has been one continuous set of experiments where I've just learned by doing. People have shared things with me, but for every reason you just mentioned, simply by putting myself in a position to flesh out an experiment, I learn by doing, and then I come back, and we were just talking about this on the ride over. Then next season, I'll just perform the same experiment slightly wiser based on my previous set of experiments, and we'll just play the whole thing back. But I would encourage people to take a step closer and to try that, because what I hear you suggesting is connectivity. There's this huge world that we're just spinning around in, and so much of our modern life detaches us from our place in it. Not detaches us in the sense that we're still not in that position or still connected, but our awareness of that connection and what it is and how mighty it is really gets diminished. And farming is a set of experiences that it reminds you constantly that you are just an animal. And like any other animal, you're subject to the whims of the weather and other creatures who too play vital roles in your wellness, your ability to sustain that wellness. And there's a partnership. There's this dynamic partnership that when our awareness of that partnership becomes less, we become less. And I think farming is a great way to rekindle that. And I think it's something that needs to be rekindled now. We need that. We, the collective, we require that awareness is rekindled so that we can get better.
One thing I would like to change is, I would definitely agree that there's just so much dynamic in the world that we live in, and I would actually see it as a blurred, because we are so busy as a people that instead of embracing, we just kind of step back. But I would like to just kind of switch. I think labeling, I would love labeling requirements to be looked at and possibly even reinforced on some level. For example, when I go into a grocery store, which is pretty rare, I get confused on why I work so hard and what I do, because it's very clear if I just read the labels that everybody else is doing the same thing I'm doing at a much different cost point. Why is that? Every farm is unique, just like every individual sitting in this room is unique as well, which is so beautiful and complex all at the same time. But my point is, for example, eggs, you can buy free-range eggs, and on our farm, we have old hay wagons. So when you strip it down, it's called a running gear. And we built it back up, and so that's something I can move on my own, because the chickens always follow the bovine or the cows for multiple reasons. But anyway, They have access. Right now, they don't really have a fence, but maybe 5 acres. The snow stops them, so they don't wander too far. We have livestock protection dogs to help. But my point is that's what is that's my vision of what a free-range egg should look like. And it's not. When you go in the store, you can... Technically, a facility could hold 20,000 birds and have a little window of access. And it's not even possible that all chickens can even go outside, let alone find the window. And there's under the same labeling considerations that I see through my lens. So it would be nice to have some consistency through, no matter what that is. Just identify, and this is what you do, and this is what I do. And then as a consumer, then you can make more informed decisions on what you're actually purchasing. So that would be one thing that I would like, changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what everyone said. I had written down that I would change, I wish that that food was like a more valuable commodity in general, like in the world and in this country specifically, that we had bigger margins, that we could pay our employees more and still provide affordable food to people. I wish that we weren't constantly facing this crunch of like where to cut the costs and how to set our prices so that it's like accessible. That just feels like such a sad situation to be in for something that everyone needs, So I think if we had like slightly cushier margins, farming could be, more enjoyable and better products and maybe like a more appealing career for a lot of people also.
Great, that was a perfect segue into the next question of what does success look like to you as a farmer? Is it financial success? Is it stability? What is it for everybody?
Well, going on with the economic theme, from my point of view on my farm, it's like you need the economic success to be able to like have the other successes, otherwise we just wouldn't exist. So like the business has to be economically viable. And then on top of that, we can have social success, so we can provide jobs and have a positive working environment and have good relationships with our customers and build our communities. And then if you have that, then you can have, the environmental and sustainable piece where you're building soils and like leaving, basically farming in an environmentally responsible way. But I do feel like the economic success is kind of the piece that allows those other things to happen. Or maybe they're all codependent. Maybe they all allow each other to happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was good.
I think for me, success looks, in this situation, it looks a little bit different, right? Because I'm working for a nonprofit institution. But I think no matter where I'm farming, success really looks like constantly learning and improving. I don't want to be making the same mistakes over and over and over again. So if we make a mistake, we learn from it. And I have that conversation a lot with kids. Mistakes are going to happen and accidents are going to happen and things are going to happen. And you are not doing the animals or the space or the environment or the world around you or the people around you any favors by continuing to make the same mistakes. So when something happens, it's really important to pause and to take stock of what happened and why, and to very intentionally learn from that mistake and to move forward with the goal of not repeating it. And I think for me, that's really, really, really big in general as a person. I think as growing up on a farm and watching my parents have success and have failures, I think that's something that they instilled in me, and then continuing this work in a space with the goal of teaching children so much. I think that's really an important part of it, and I consider myself successful if I can remember to pause and take a moment and say, hey, okay, great, like I made a mistake. How am I going to not do that again?
I think success for me, looking at it, would be all farms, period, to be at their 100% capacity. which is a beautiful thing because most farms, if you get to know your farmer, they can produce more. But then you have that, okay, now what do I do with it? Or I only have so much time. Or it would just be a beautiful picture if we were all in harmony, 100%. Just, yeah, that to me is success. We have a long way to go.
I suppose, two answers, parallel tracks, but going in the same direction. One, we have 2 children, and I'm proud of them, and I'm really proud of us for raising them on a farm. I'm in awe of what they know and what they have been exposed to as young people. That I was an adult who had made many mistakes and walked a long crooked road until I came to where they seem to have been fortunate enough to start out. My kids know how to save seeds and to plant seeds and to care for animals. And it's a simple thing to say, but they know something of where food comes from and everything that is required in order to produce it. And that is success, undoubtedly, for me. It also is, a summer night when I can pop open a bottle of homemade wine, or eating my fill of cherry tomatoes right off the vine, still warm from the sun, or today when I can get done and know that I set the goal of making 5 gallons of maple syrup for our family this winter, and I think I'll reach it, and that should last us most of the year. Just those little things that I guess for us as a family, economically, we've produced something that we will now not have to spend money on, but the satisfaction of being able to know that it was from us is a pretty invaluable thing to experience. So all of that is success for me.
Piggyback on that, my success on our farm is exactly that. Opening up a can of stewed tomatoes that I canned at the end of the season last year in March in the snowy 19-degree weather. That's to feed my family. That's success for us, for me.
Great. I love hearing about, the next generation coming up and having them immersed in that. It was how I grew up, and it wouldn't have changed it for the world. So going a little bit off script here, but I think it makes sense here. So in the Adirondacks, we have a really short growing season. A lot of us are seasonal here, and we love to support our farms during the season. But what is one thing a community member can do in the off season to support our local farms?
That's a good question.
Fly us somewhere tropical.
No way. No, we have so many amazing farmers in this area, and I just I get excited even in the wintertime. I do the farmers markets, and just to see, there's a lot of root crops this time of year, but it amazes me what you guys bring. That's just phenomenal. Anyway, so how can people get involved? I know a lot of farmers have CSAs or farm shares. Put your own name on it, but I guarantee if you go to Adirondack Harvest, or am I allowed to promote?
Absolutely.
Anyway, you can go to different outlets, or just go to your farmers market or ANCA or any. There's so many great agencies in the area that are plugged in to us farmers on different ways. But so most farmers do offer off-season. Even though the bounty isn't as full, the bounty is still there. As far as people raising animals, sure, your meat birds or your chicken will be kind of seasonal if you're looking for something fresh, but your beef, pork, and eggs, the egg layers don't get the memo that, hey, it's time to rest. And at Harmony Hills Farm, so we do not use any artificial lighting or heating in our hen houses. And they still lay year round. They slow down. That's okay. We work with nature to the best of our ability. So I just encourage everybody to reach out, and next time you go to the grocery store and go, oh, look at that pork chop, you know, think, oh, what other farmer in my area that may have. Another thing about, for our farm, I always wanted to do it, but since COVID was like the push off the cliff, to have an online presence. And so a lot of farmers have an online, and I know for myself personally, I'm in Lake Placid every Wednesday doing deliveries. And so it doesn't matter if you want a dozen eggs chopped, or I have CSA members. And I'm not the only farmer that does that. So please reach out, and it's just not supporting one farmer. And I do have some customers that are so loyal, and I'm very, very thankful for their year-round support. But please support us all. We all have something to bring to the table.
Yes, I appreciate the support in the off-season. We have produce at least 10 months of the year, but something that I really crave in the winter is connecting with my customers and community members, just like as a person, because it's so busy during the summer, and it can feel like you're so one-dimensional in a way, right? Like I'm just a farmer doing this thing, and like all the time I'm doing this thing, but it's like, you know, I have other interests, and like I like just connecting with people. So I love just getting to know the people that I normally see in the line at the farmer's market, just on a more personal level in the rest of the year. So if you see your farmer around, maybe ask them, just ask them something about themselves.
Yeah, I think that's really significant, actually. Like, make sure we're okay. I don't know. Like, I don't know. That's real. I mean, it's. I love this work. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But sometimes it's really isolating, and it's really lonely, and it's really hard. So I think there is something to be said for just checking in and making sure we're okay. I don't know. I mean, sometimes there's not a whole lot of time to read, but like drop off your favorite book, or be like, how are you doing? Do you want to get some coffee? Sometimes we need to be like pulled away from the space that's really all consuming most of the time, and it takes a lot out of you. And I think mental health matters, and checking in is really nice. It's nice to know that you're not alone, and that people are thinking about you when it's cold and it's dark and you have to go check for newborn lambs again, or I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to it, but I think it can be lonely and it can be isolating, and it's nice to know that people see us as more than just a farmer.
Yeah, I would agree. It is at times isolating. Just hearing you say that, it made me realize I forget that sometimes. And we were always talking about how nice it would be to have other friends that are farmers, just so that you could. That's how I could have something to talk about. Or every conversation wouldn't feel so awkward and forced, because all I really want to talk about is what's going on in the farm. And I think that's a good point. And I also think, to your point about I know that for us, spending more money on quality food is an investment in our health and our community that we're willing to make, because it's worth money. And it's worth money because it's enriching, it promotes health, not only within your body, but also health within your community. And I think I would hope that people everywhere are beginning to understand that anything that you put into your body is essentially a medicine of sorts, and it's either good medicine or bad medicine. And we should be willing to support our local farmers year-round, and we should be willing to approach what we eat as something that either gives or takes health away from us. And I think we should prioritize that in terms of what we're willing to spend money on, because you mentioned eggs. The difference between 18 eggs, white eggs from the grocery store, versus what you're selling on your farm, these are different things. They both look like eggs, but in terms of how they taste, the integrity both that went into the egg, but also the integrity with which the creature that laid it and the land that supported it was treated are so much more. And I think that as one of the great things about farming is when we begin to break it down, we all have to eat to survive. So we're all dependent upon a food source, whether or not we want it to come cheaply or not. And cheap food is not good food sometimes. And I think both in terms of supporting our local farmers, but also just in terms of supporting ourselves, I think there's a reprioritization in terms of what our financial priorities are. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be some evolution and some growth with regard to, what is the value of $1? What are we willing to spend $1 on? I know for myself, I will spend more money on good food anytime, and that will be at the expense of my clothing, that will be the expense of the shoes on my feet, that will be at the expense of the silly little things that I keep around the house to amuse and distract me. Mm-hmm. We spend our money on food because food matters.
Mm-hmm.
That was great. I loved hearing about the mental health of farmers is so important. So when you check in on your family and friends, add your farmers to that list too. Can you please share an example of an innovative way in which you've overcome a challenge?
For us at Harmony Hills Farmstead, it was the time when, it was a few years back, our major USDA processor lost their USDA certification. And most people would be like, hey, okay, whatever, just go to another one. Great. It was during a period of time where everybody was already booked up, mm-hmm. full to capacity. So just to give you an idea, I have to book my pig appointments before the pigs are even born. Crazy. It takes them approximately 6 to 7 months before they're mature. Beef is even longer. It's usually 10, sometimes a year out. So it becomes extremely challenging. So you just can't call on a moment's notice. Our processor does work. I work with 2 different processors. They do try. It's just hard and just a lot of hoops. So anyway, when our main processor lost their USDA certification, I already had all those schedules. Everything was moving. I thought really great, and then you get the phone call, and it was almost like somebody pushed me down, and I couldn't even stop it. Because that meant no restaurants, no farmers markets, no direct sales, nothing. You're done. So I was like, that's a bad day. Let's pivot. So that's what we did. We pivoted to the CSA model, started offering shares to customers, and we've just grown, and the CSA definitely has carried us through the good, the bad, and the ugly, years where it is more challenging. So that was definitely something that, that could have been worse, but you learn from it and you move forward, because we had to make a decision right then and there. Are we going to stop? Because that would have been easy just to fold and go home. It's like, no, I'm not done. This is my purpose. So that's what we did.
Well, the thing that popped into my mind for this question really pertained to soil health. The soil on our farm, we live right off Route 3 on the Route 3 corridor between Saranac Lake and Plattsburgh. And I know from talking to a friend of mine who grew up in the area that when they rerouted Route 3, the company that was building the road came through and they scraped a lot of topsoil in order to build the highway up so that it would drain properly. And our farm is, or it was at one time, part of a much larger potato and apple farm. And when we got there, like any dirt in the Adirondacks, there is dirt here, but there's a lot of rocks too. So soil health and just really building up some soil was really our first concern and our first priority. Mm-hmm. And in another aspect of my life, my introduction to the Adirondacks was as a summer person, a dreaded summer person. Don't hold it against me, but I was once. I live here now. But my family had a camp. We still have this camp on Mountain View Lake in Indian Lake over in Owl's Head. And probably 25 years ago, I can remember first discovering with my father, who at the time was on the board of directors for our lake association, that we had Eurasian water milfoil, which is an invasive aquatic species. It's pretty common in the Adirondacks, pretty problematic. And I can remember 25 years ago hand harvesting and diving with him just as we were beginning to understand that this plant was in our waterway and that it likely was never going to go, because anyone that's familiar with it, it's difficult to manage, almost impossible to eradicate. Well, 20-something years later, my wife, my family, and I are now living in the Adirondacks, and we at the time, in the course of managing Eurasian water milfoil in our Indian Lake and Mountain View Lake, we have gone to a team of divers, which a lot of people have done inside the park, where you hire a crew of people who make their living hand harvesting Eurasian water milfoil. And it's pretty expensive to get them, and they come anywhere from 3 to 5 times this summer, depending on how much we can afford to pay them. But we have created a partnership with these divers where when they are going to be harvesting at the end of the week that they're in the lake, we'll meet them, and I always joke that we're doing like a giant weed deal at the boat launch in Mountain View, because we kind of are, but it's a different kind of weed. And that joke never gets old. I like to tell that to them every time I see them, and they think it's probably not as funny as I do. But we've probably, at this point, over the course of the years, probably applied, 10 tons of Eurasian water milfoil to our raised beds. And I have to say, there's a noticeable difference in terms of the soil health and the production of beds that we're able to apply it to next year. Because also that in the course of hand harvesting it, you have to take the root ball out in order to effectively eradicate that one plant from the lake. So you get not only the plant itself, which can grow 20 feet tall, so it basically grows from the lake bed all the way up to the surface of the water. You get the plant, you get the ram's horn snail shells, you get the freshwater clam shells, and then you get the bottom muck that come with it. So in terms of a source of trace minerals and calcium from the animal shells, it's really a wonderful soil amendment, and it, to my mind, has been a really great way of not only improving soil health on our farm, but also utilizing this plant that has shown up in the Adirondacks and is pretty problematic in our local waterways.
I think we were talking about this on the way here, and we're on this old farm where we lease land from my extended family, and a few years ago we wanted to expand kind of like our processing facility where we were going to be washing our veggies, and it was kind of a daunting task because it's like we don't own the property, so are we going to invest a bunch of money either into renovating an old barn or building a new barn? On top of that, we're kind of in a flood-prone area, so the thought of like building a barn or traditional like stick frame barn with insulation and everything, and then having a big Irene type of flood was kind of intimidating. So we ended up working with a company out of Plattsburgh and designing a shipping container, like a structure that was based around a converted shipping container, and so reusing an old 40-foot shipping container and turning that into an insulated wash pack space, and then building a roof over that. So we have like a functional structure that is movable if we decide to leave, and is significantly more like flood resistant than kind of a wood frame structure. So that was kind of what we thought.
So great. I do not feel like an innovative person. I heard this question, I was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so terribly embarrassing. I'm not very innovative at all. But I think that my favorite thing about farming is it's so great to learn new like tips and tricks and things, and it's really wonderful to hear other people talk about things that they do that make their job easier. And I think that my favorite thing right now, as I think about this like if I was going to say like a tip and trick that we have come up with on our farm, is you can open a bale of hay with a piece of twine from an already opened bale of hay. And it sounds so ridiculous, but the kids love it. So you don't need scissors, you don't have to worry about losing the knives. You can take that piece of baling twine and you can weave it underneath, and if you pull really hard back and forth, the other strings just pop off, and it's so great. And so I don't have to worry about lost knives, I don't have to worry about lost scissors, I don't have to worry about, the kids losing all the tools to open the bales of hay. But what's really great and exciting about that is they learn that tip or the trick, and they get really excited to share it. And so it's really wonderful to come into the barn and have somebody be like, oh yeah, I can open this bale of hay, do you have a knife? And all of the kids run to the trash barrel. They're like, no, let me show you how to do it. So I think that's really great. I didn't invent that. I learned it from somebody. But
I'm going to do that tomorrow.
But yeah, it's so great. It's so great. You don't need a knife to open a bale of hay.
I just forget my knife, and then I'm like, I can't
just back and forth really fast. It's great.
So my parents thought that was a good idea to teach us until we then went up in the hay mow and undid probably 200 bales of hay with me and my couple of brothers. So that was the end of that one pretty quick. Kept the tips to themselves. So the next one is, where I grew up, it was a very rural farm, agrarian community. And not until going to college did I realize, not everybody grew up like this. And so what is a surprising thing about farming to you? So for me, it was like, I didn't realize that not everybody had held a lamb, that it was just born, or watched a chick hatch, or pulled a potato from the ground. It just kind of blew my mind that some people had never experienced anything like that. So I don't know if you have similar stories or a different one, so.
Oh yes, I have a great one. So I was in high school, and my mom ran this great program. She would take livestock into the Rochester City School District schools, and into the schools. We did different animals, different years, but I vividly remember driving the trailer there with my mom, and we put a bunch of hay down in a section of the hallway, and I was so excited that I got to participate in this. I'm so proud, and I put a halter on our Jersey cow, and we walked this cow right into the school, and there were high school students and middle school students lining the halls, and they were so excited, and I was just like, this is so great. They like my cow. Like, they think this is really cool. And I'm walking her name was Reggie, like look at me go with my cow. And one kid went, oh, a camel. And I was like, no, wait a minute, no. And so it was a really eye-opening experience for me, because they were serious. And I had this moment of like, wait a minute, what? And so that led to a conversation where my mom, God bless her, was like, go ahead, handle that one. See how you do that, kiddo. And so that led to a conversation about like, well, no, this is a cow. What is a cow? And I was like, well, where do you get your milk? And they were like, oh, Wegmans. My mom shops at Wegmans. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's really wonderful. Where does Wegmans get it? And there was silence. And I started to panic. I was like, they don't know. They don't know. And I had this moment of like, they really don't know. And so then we brought out a stool, and we brought out a bucket, and I sat on the stool, and I milked the cow, and just watched these kids' minds get blown. They were like, no way. I was like, yes. Like, you get your milk from Wegmans. Wegmans gets their milk from her. And so that was like a really cool thing. And I think in that I realized that there's a lot of things that people don't know about farming. But I think the thing that people don't know the most is not only, sure, does milk come from cows, but like I knew Reggie's birthday, and I knew Reggie's mom, and I knew when Reggie was vaccinated, and I knew everything about Reggie's life and what was happening in her life, and And, do I have all of these details about all of the animals that I raise available to me at the drop of a hat? No, sometimes I forget some of those details, but I certainly have them accessible to me, and often I can tell you when their birthday is or little things about them. And I think sometimes people look at farming and agriculture and they either see somebody who has all these pets and isn't it cute, or they think of somebody who's raising insane amounts of animals and they don't care. And I do care, and I want to be there for all of the things. I love being there for the beginning, and I would never not be there for the end. I think the whole thing is really important, and I think that that's sometimes something that we don't necessarily associate with farmers. Every bit of those animals' lives and what happens in their lives matter to me. There's nothing too big or too small, and there's nothing that I wouldn't participate in or don't partake in when it comes to what's happening in their lives, because all of it matters. I got really excited about that one.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great.
We had a baby pig that it was our first litter on the farm. So the first couple years we just bought in feeder pigs because I grew up on a dairy farm in Nebraska. And so my whole outlook on life is you only had cows and horses. Everything else was just kind of dirty and, beneath you type of thing. I'm not saying that that's right or justified. I'm just saying that was how I grew up. Anyway, so you can imagine when I told, especially my dad, my mom and dad are divorced, that we have 2 pigs and we have 6 chickens. My dad's like, girl, what are you doing? So anyway, our first sow, she had piglets. And the little runt got stepped on by mama because we do not use farrowing crates. They farrow in a hut. And so this poor little piglet didn't even weigh 2 pounds. It was so tiny. And at that time I was still working full time off the farm. And so I had this little tiny piglet and I was like, okay, it's gonna be fine. Got it up nursing because I'm usually there when mamas have their babies. It's just really important to dry them off, get them nursing right away. And it just is a happy start. So long story short, she got injured. Mom stepped on her, and it would be like from our knee to our ankle was just bone. So all the skin, cartilage, everything was just stripped. So I was like, okay, not a big deal. I'll wash it really good and put it back together and it'll heal. Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. So she had just an amazing life. So she went to work with me. She was like my dog. And so anyway, she was so tiny. I had a problem feeding her because she was so tiny, and she ate like every half an hour to hour. That's round the clock. And she'd only take like 3 little sips and then she was done. Well, she got an infection in her leg, and so since I was working in Malone at the time, I didn't know who to call, so I called a pediatrician. And I took my little baby pig. The pediatrician said, come during lunchtime because that might freak everybody else out. And so I brought her this little piglet, and he was amazing. He's like, yeah, she needs antibiotics, anyway, so the nurse told me how to change the bandage and clean it, and she healed. But she was litter trained because I'm an accountant. So we had clients that would come to the office just to see baby Charlotte. So I didn't name baby Charlotte, but her name was Charlotte, but I called her baby Charlotte. She'll always be my baby Charlotte. But we would have people come to the farm, and we live on a farm. There's pigs, cows, chickens, turkeys, rabbits, anyway. And baby Charlotte, just like I said, she was like our dog. So she lived in the house for a while until she got too big, and then she graduated to the barn and then to the pasture. So there would be people that would pull up, and Charlotte would follow the dog like, hey, it's my job to greet you. And people would be like, what is that? Is that a pig? You have a pig? So, anyway, I don't know. Yeah, she lived a very, very long life. Yeah, I miss her. She was my best mom ever. Yeah.
I can't follow those stories.
Right, what are you gonna
I
do?
got nothing for you.
That's fine. Did you guys answer? Or have one?
No, I don't much want to follow those stories either. I think most people would be surprised by most of it, you know, that I just, in general, I feel like to farm is to give your time and your attention up to so many things other than yourself. You know, you're on call and on demand. I think that's really the nature of that partnership, is when things have to happen, they have to happen. It doesn't matter if you had plans that evening or wanted to sleep that night. There's work to be done. And I think the sheer consistency and repetition of that theme would be surprising for people. Because I think most of us, or most people that I know, they want to be able to dip into their own lives and their own thoughts on a whim, and they want to follow them until they're done with that. And when they want to do something else, they want to do something else, and they seem to live their life something like that. And I don't remember the last time I slept in. Or even really wanted to, but had I wanted to, would have really had the option of doing that. And I think that would surprise people. And I think just the work of it. You know, I think of someone mentioned their mother. My mother is kind of like the worthy antagonist in my life. She propels me to great things by just slowly antagonizing me. And but she always wants tomatoes. She always wants tomatoes. And basically she just says, you know, one day in July she'll swoop in on a weekend and she expects tomatoes. And that's great, Mom, you know, but for me, the journey of that tomato starts in the fall when I'm saving seeds from the last round of them, and I'm putting them aside and ensuring that they'll still be viable when I want to germinate them in a few months. And then it's going to require planting. And 2 years ago, we lost our power for an extended period of time, and the heat went out in our greenhouse, and all of our plants come in. Our tomato plants were in our bed because that was a flat surface that we had available. And we slept on the floor so that they would make it through. And I think it's things like that it's great that she wants to swoop in on a weekend in July and eat fresh tomatoes. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that that's possible. But, man, I hope she enjoys them, right?
Yeah.
All great answers. Thank you. So the last question I have before we open it up to audience questions for a bit is the farmer in the video we showed at the beginning will tell you that he's not a cattle farmer, but rather he's a farmer of the soil because all life starts with the soil. Can you tell us one way or ways in which you replenish and retain the soil health on your farm?
We do some rotational grazing, which is great, and we intentionally create space for sacrifice. There are parts of the property that can't have animals on them because they're used for other things. So we try to be really intentional about what areas we are going to sacrifice so that the whole space doesn't suffer. We move the animals around and really try to be conscientious about what we're damaging so that the rest of it can continue to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
I just mulch. I think everything on a good farm is about soil health, and it's hard to do any one thing without considering the impact on your soil and its health. All of our raised beds that we grow, we don't till them, and that requires a pretty copious amount of mulch. I see the whole property as kind of one big carbon sequestration experiment, and in that I'm always on the lookout for leaves or straw or brush or wood chips or old Christmas trees or anything that I can take and then turn into mulch for our beds, food which then in turn becomes food for the soil. Or I have an experiment now that I'm trying to create a series of brush fences around some of our rotational paddocks for our sheep that I've sunk a bunch of old Christmas trees into last year. But it really comes down to mulch. I just feel like you feed soil by placing organic matter on top of it, and it needs to be done consistently and often. And I think biodiversity is really key, just to get as much different stuff onto the soil and then into the soil as possible, just so you can create a rich environment for everything that you want to live there. Insects, bacteria, fungus, all of these things. But it all requires being fed, and mulch for me is like my secret weapon.
He loves mulch.
I do love mulch.
And really cool to hear about your bilfoil reusing something that would otherwise just rot somewhere, you know, and putting that to use. Great.
Yeah, if you don't have good soil, I mean, that's your foundation, period. So at Harmony Hills Farmstead, we definitely do a lot of rotational grazing during the grass season. We live in very sandy soil, similar, I mean, it's the Adirondacks. So we have done a lot of just moving animals around. Pigs are the first ones to go in, then the bovine, the cows, and then the chickens always follow. So with the rotational grazing, in addition to that, in the wintertime, we'll have those sacrifice areas. And then my husband and I will go in and clean up all the hay piles from either the pig huts or where the cows were fed for their hay for the winter. And then we compost. We do a lot of compost. We also harvest chickens and turkeys and rabbits on our farm. So all the compost from that gets added to that hay pile. It breaks down for approximately 3 years, or that's the cycle that we're kind of on. And then at that point in time, we either feed it back to our garden. We don't sell any vegetables on our farm, but we are very self-sufficient. I love to can, freeze. Just this past week, I ground up, it's probably little in comparison, but I did a gallon of garlic powder. So excited, I love garlic powder. So anyway.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. But anyway, so with that said, we feed the garden, which feeds ourselves and friends and family. So with that, it's just a whole circle, its own system. So between the rotational grazing, the composting, and then spreading the manure back, either garden or back on our pastures.
Yeah, I loved hearing what everyone had to say. Our big thing is cover crops. We're on the floodplain of the Ausable River, so keeping our soil covered and kind of like held in place with roots is really important when we experience seasonal flooding, like in December, for example, and just all the time to add organic matter back to the soil, to fix nitrogen, to pull up deeper nutrients that our annual crops can't access. So cover crops are a big soil builder.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you so much. So now we're going to open it up for audience questions, and Chris is going to come around with a mic, so if you just can raise your hand or stand up if you have a question, and she'll come around.
Thank you. This is fascinating. Actually, inspiration. You know, I think that you're a panel of philosopher farmers as well. I have a question about since we are so close to the Canadian border. I was wondering if you perceive a different culture in agriculture between the U.S. and Canada, you know, specifically Quebec, how they approach either marketing or just the ethos or any aspect that you find different, that you find preferable north of the border or less preferable.
That's a really interesting question. I don't know that I have come across anything like that between, like, here in Canada specifically. I think where I've noticed maybe like differences of opinions or differences in practices is when I've come across farmers who are very dedicated, like you said, to like one creature. They're raising beef cattle. Or they're just raising pigs, or they're just raising chickens. Like, I think that's where I've kind of come into this is the way it's done, or have kind of come into those opinions or those systems for marketing or raising or having those creatures. But I don't know that I've encountered anything. But I'm also kind of in a different situation, being at a nonprofit.
Well, I actually moved down here from Canada. I was living in Vancouver, and my husband is Canadian. And so I was working on an urban farm in Vancouver prior to moving back here. So I got to know a little bit of this Canadian system of agriculture. And one thing that, even though I wasn't working with animals, they do have like a quota system with their lives. Were you just talking about that? They have an interesting way of like managing kind of like not overproducing, whereas I think like the U.S. government kind of encourages farms to overproduce. Their government has kind of a different approach to that, which I thought was interesting. I mean, they have some of the same struggles with land use, especially around big cities and zoning and making sure land stays in farmland. But much smaller population, much smaller country, so it's kind of like different style of management was kind of my experience.
I just have a quick question for Erica.
Of course he does.
One of her, she has a fabulous innovation and she has a lot of innovation. She's being modest. That didn't come from her husband like the hay bale one. But Honey, she is my wife, I should say. Could you please talk a little bit about your lambing simulator? Because I think that is amazing, and I think it's a great way to teach kids about the miracle of life.
Okay, so we do have a lambing simulator. Yes, okay, lovely. We have a lambing simulator, so we talk a lot with students about the importance of using correct anatomical terminology, understanding the function. A lot of them are taking biology class, right? Like they are experiencing some form or another of sex ed. They're learning about the system, life cycles and things. And so when we were having conversations about lambing, it was kind of this conversation like, okay, great, how are we going to talk to these kids about what's happening and what we expect? There's good presentations when lambs are being born and bad presentations, which are called dystocias. How are we going to talk to these kids? That's not just a way of me standing up there and lecturing them about what's supposed to happen. I have a whiteboard. I love to draw on the whiteboard. They can only sit still for me drawing on the whiteboard for so long. So we created this lambing simulator, which is really fun. I didn't invent the lambing simulator, but we found a few different types on the internet and then kind of combined them. And it's a big plastic tote. And then we have cut holes and adapted it. So inside there is a bag that is representing the uterus, and we have a couple of lamb puppets, and I place them in the uterus, and then we have a legitimate sheep pelvis that was donated to the cause, and so the pelvis is in there with fishing line, and then the bag comes through the pelvis, and there is a hairband around that acts as the cervix, and then there's an opening that comes out, and we talk to the kids a lot about what's happening, and we have conversation about what we're expecting, and they all stand around the simulator, and I can put lambs in there and say, like, this is what's supposed to be happening. We want them to come out diving. We want to see 2 feet and a nose, and they can see it. And then in our biology class, we talk about the anatomy and physiology and the function of all of these body parts. And it leads to some really great conversation, because in that I'm talking about the way the lambs should be in the uterus, and we talk about when we're delivering them, how they are going to come through the cervix, how the cervix needs to dilate, and then the lambs are going to, during parturition, come out of the ewe's body, and what we want to be seeing. And it's really an amazing way to connect with the kids, because then they're seeing things and they're doing things, and it's hands-on. And they are making these connections to themselves and to life cycles in a way that's really natural and wonderful. And it's really not that awkward. They can't embarrass me, so I've had them ask me all kinds of questions about what's happening, but it leads to really, really great discussion. And the lambing simulator, so we set it up, and then usually we blindfold the kids that are going to be delivering the lamb, because you can't see inside the ewe's body when she's actually having a baby. And so they take turns feeling whether they have 2 feet and a nose, and talking about whether the presentation is normal or whether it's a dystocia. And then, we talk from there, okay, like what would we do? What would our next steps be? Do we want to intervene? Should we not intervene? Do we call the vet? What's happening? And it's just led to so many great questions where they are looking at something and it's bigger than themselves. It's bigger than like a ha, it's funny, she said a funny word kind of conversation. And they take it so seriously, and they're so wonderful about it. And it's one of the favorite activities of the spring when we get to lambing and using the simulator and learning about the cycle of life.
That's really cool.
Oh, that's great. All right, I think we have time for one last one. What do you got, Pepe?
And I forgot to unmute myself. What is the biggest challenge you see while, for lack of a better word, competing with major grocery stores? As a person that grew up in a farm and then moved to the US and everything was a grocery store, I went from mountain life in Puerto Rico to Miami. So it was a drastic change for me. Actually, Marissa was one of my first farmers that I met here, and I bought produce from. So what is your biggest challenge for selling against a major grocery store?
I think for us, I mean, we have a lot of really educated customers and great, just great customers, but like getting people to kind of ride the seasonal wave of produce is like the most typical one, I think. Just kind of teaching people to wait for wait for those tomatoes in July and August, and to kind of we extend the season a little bit, but kind of letting people enjoy, eat those root crops and first greens right now, and know that more is coming soon, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea that came to our mind just hearing you ask that question was convenience. It seems that food has become so married to our culture of convenience that what people reach for when they're hungry is almost or often just something that's quick. And I don't want to project too much of my personal opinion here, but quick and easy. And farmers produce real food, the whole ingredients that are then in turn processed and broken down and altered into these foods of convenience. And maybe just to take it back to, it's hard to work against that, where people move so quickly, and we want things to be convenient, both to entertain us and to enlighten us, but also to nourish us. And that's a hard thing to push back against, because it takes time to prepare whole real foods. Mm-hmm. It does. I mean, if you're going to sit down and cook a meal for your family and you're going to use things that haven't been processed or refined, it will be worth it for many different reasons when in an hour and a half or 2 hours you sit down to dinner. But it in addition to an investment of perhaps a little bit more money, although I think there's a misconception that whole foods have to necessarily cost more. I don't think that that's always true at all. But it will take time. And unfortunately, we it seems just as a culture, we prioritize the ways that we expend our time on other things that don't necessarily nourish us. And to me, it seems like the most basic common sense that if I was going to put something in my body for the purpose of nourishing my life and the life of my loved ones, that I would take whatever time was necessary to prepare the best ingredients that were available, because I've come to a point in my life where I just consider food to be a form of medicine for the body, mind, and the spirit. But trying to ease people or pry people out of this culture of convenience, where I'm hungry now and I want to be able to grab something and consume it and no longer be hungry in 5 minutes, that's a really hard thing to untangle, because so much of the inertia of our life is just pushing us along at such a rapid rate of speed.
Yeah, I think I have lots of opinions. I think it's important also to recognize that we are in a place, we're so fortunate. We're in a place where there is fresh food available. And not everybody has that, right? Not everybody has access to the farmers markets. Not everybody has access to growing their own food. Not everybody has access to these kinds of things. So I think it's also important, as we're sitting up here talking about food and where food comes from and good food and the benefits of good food, for sure, absolutely. Recognizing that not everybody has access to it. Not everybody has access to what we have access to. And we are so fortunate in so many ways. And I think, looking at, I've had lots of different discussions with people, and sometimes I see people be really quick to be like, oh, like big ag is really bad. Farmers feed the world. Whether they are big farmers or little farmers, farmers feed the world. And if big ag and these large chain grocery stores cease to exist tomorrow, millions or billions of people would die of starvation. And I think that the answer is in education, the answer is in accessibility, the answer is in innovation, and the answer is working together. The answer is when little farmers and big farmers get together and they say, hey, let's figure out better ways to do this, because there are better ways to do things. There are ways to increase our productivity in a way that is sustainable and healthy and wonderful for the world around us. And it's making sure that we are looking at food and we're looking at what is good and what is healthy and where it came from and whether it was humanely and ethically sourced and cared for. And we're recognizing that at this moment in time, not everybody has access to it. And how do we make it more accessible? How do we improve the system of farming as a whole? Because as the world is right now, we need big ag. We need those big chain grocery stores to feed people. And it's my hope that that's not always the case. Not, maybe not forever. There was a question about, 100 years from now or whatever on the, hopefully someday that will change and everybody will have access to good, wholesome, fresh food. But I think taking time in our little small Adirondack town to be grateful for what we have is also really important.
I think to that, you should know that there are programs out there that do help access local foods through Cornell Cooperative Extension and Adirondack Action. They're able to support a lot of different CSAs and different WIC program, a UPIC program. So if you are in need of those sort of resources, they are out there, and I'm happy to direct you to those.
The food pantry in Lake Placid also.
And the food pantry, yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Really amazing.
Yeah.
Really amazing stuff.
I was going to ask one more question, because in the last couple of years have been very excited about this farm to table, and I'm trying to eat healthier because I've always eaten junk food myself, and so I'm very interested in all this. You keep mentioning CSA, and I think some of you are part of that, and I'm not sure everybody in the audience, does everybody know what a CSA is? I mean, maybe a lot of people do. Did somebody want to just really quickly explain to those who don't know what it is? Just.
I'll let you take that one.
CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and it originated in Japan, but it's come to mean a lot of different things. But at the core of it is that the consumer is taking on some of the risk for the farmer. So whether that means committing to a whole season and just taking a share of whatever produce the farmer has each week, or in our case it means just giving us capital up front and then collecting their vegetables throughout the year. It can mean a lot of different things, but it's like some prolonged, committed relationship between a farmer and a customer.
You offer a CSA, right?
Yeah, we offer a version of it.
And I think Harmony Hills, I don't know, does the North Country School do anything like that? And you guys are kind of doing your own thing over there. But the reason I'm asking that is because I want you to be aware that these people, some of them, are selling their products and growing them, and I'm sure they would appreciate your support. So hopefully they'll stay behind for a couple of minutes or meet you out front, and if somebody wants your contact information or wants to know more about you, I want you guys, yes, we want you to promote yourselves. And we appreciate that you all came out in this horrible weather, and some came from Malone, Keene Valley, Sugar. They didn't just, step from across the street. So thank you so much for coming. And the last part of our program is the raffle. And so we're going to have somebody choose a name, and hopefully that person is still here.
I'll read it. You can read it. Brian Bliss. I just want to say that these people give a whole new meaning to love your farmer.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think it's also worth thinking the LPCA. It's not often I think that farmers get a voice, and it was really exciting to be invited to share. I love what I do, but it was exciting to be able to share that. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful program. I'm really excited about maybe calling you back next year.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.